The security camera footage didn't lie. At 3:47 p.m. on a sunny Tuesday afternoon, outside Franklin's Corner Store on Main Street, a young woman in designer sunglasses and luxury activewear shoved an elderly man so hard that he stumbled backward, struck his head against the brick storefront, and crumpled to the sidewalk like a discarded newspaper. Her name was Jessica Thornton, 26 years old, and she carried herself with the unmistakable air of someone who had never been told no in her entire life. She was married to Detective Marcus Thornton, a decorated officer in the city's police department, and she made sure everyone knew it. The victim was Harold Chen, 73 years old, a retired postal worker who had served his community faithfully for 42 years. He was known throughout the neighborhood for his kindness, his weekly volunteer work at the community center, and the way he still hand-delivered birthday cards to every child on his street. He had fought in Vietnam, raised 3 children as a widower, and never missed a Sunday service at St. Michael's Church. On that Tuesday afternoon, Harold had been slowly making his way into the store, using his cane for support, when Jessica, talking loudly on her phone and not watching where she was going, nearly collided with him in the doorway. "Watch where you're going, old man," she had snapped, her voice dripping with contempt. Harold had politely apologized, even though he had done nothing wrong. "I'm sorry, miss. These old legs don't move as fast as they used to." "Maybe you should stay home then," Jessica had retorted, rolling her eyes. She had tried to push past him, but Harold, off balance, had inadvertently blocked her path for just a moment longer. That's when she shoved him. 3 witnesses saw it happen. The store's owner, Mrs. Rodriguez, rushed outside and found Harold bleeding from a gash on his head, dazed and unable to stand. An ambulance was called. Harold was transported to Memorial Hospital with a concussion, 2 broken ribs from the fall, and a fractured wrist. Jessica had stood there, arms crossed, phone still pressed to her ear. When Mrs. Rodriguez confronted her, Jessica had simply said, "He was in my way. Maybe next time he'll be more careful." When the police arrived, officers who were not from her husband's precinct, and informed her she was being arrested for assault, Jessica had laughed. Actually laughed. "Do you know who my husband is?" she had said, her voice rising with indignation. "Detective Marcus Thornton. You're making a huge mistake. This is going nowhere." But the officers, to their credit, had seen the footage. They had seen Harold's bleeding head. They had heard the witnesses. They placed Jessica Thornton under arrest. The story spread through the town like wildfire. By evening, the local news had picked it up. By morning, it was the talk of every coffee shop, every church meeting, every parent pickup line at school. People were outraged. Harold Chen was beloved. Jessica Thornton was not. Social media erupted with demands for justice. #Justice for Harold trended locally. The video footage, shared thousands of times, showed clearly what had happened: unprovoked violence against a defenseless elderly man. Jessica's attorney, a slick young lawyer named Craig Delmont who specialized in making problems disappear for wealthy clients, immediately went to work. He issued statements about unfortunate misunderstandings and overreactions. He hinted that charges would likely be dropped due to insufficient evidence or reduced to a mere citation. The community wasn't buying it. Neither was the district attorney's office. The case was moving forward to trial. Harold Chen spent 5 days in the hospital. His children flew in from out of state to be with him. When he was finally discharged, he was weaker, more fragile, and haunted by a new fear, the fear that he was no longer safe in the neighborhood he'd called home for 50 years. The trial date was set for 3 weeks later. Judge Margaret Sullivan would preside, a veteran jurist with 30 years on the bench, known for her fairness, her sharp legal mind, and her absolute intolerance for anyone who thought they were above the law. As the date approached, speculation swirled. Would Jessica Thornton actually face real consequences? Or would her connections protect her? Would justice truly be served? People packed the courthouse steps on the morning of the trial, holding signs that read, "Respect our elders," and no one is above the law. Inside the courthouse, in a small conference room, Jessica Thornton sat with her attorney, smirking as she scrolled through her phone. She wore an expensive navy dress carefully chosen to make her look respectable, but her body language screamed defiance. "This is a joke," she muttered. "They can't actually convict me. Not with Marcus's connections." Craig Delmont looked less confident than he wanted to appear. "Just stick to the script. Show remorse. Apologize. Make it look good for the judge." Jessica rolled her eyes. "Whatever. This will be over in an hour." Outside, Harold Chen arrived with his daughter Sarah supporting his arm. He moved slowly, still recovering. But his eyes were clear and determined. He had decided he would tell his story, no matter how painful, because he believed in justice. The bailiff called the courtroom to order. Everyone rose as Judge Sullivan entered, her black robes flowing behind her, her expression unreadable. The trial was about to begin. But an unexpected revelation was about to change everything in the courtroom. Courtroom 4B was packed to capacity. Every seat in the gallery was filled. Local reporters sat with notebooks ready. Community members who couldn't get inside pressed against the hallway windows, straining to see. The air was thick with anticipation and barely contained anger. Judge Margaret Sullivan surveyed the room from her elevated bench with the calm authority of someone who had seen every kind of human behavior imaginable over 3 decades. At 62 years old, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and sharp brown eyes that missed nothing, she commanded respect without having to demand it. She had presided over murderers, white-collar criminals, domestic abusers, and corrupt officials. She had heard every excuse, every lie, every manipulation tactic in the book. And she had developed an almost supernatural ability to detect insincerity. "All rise," the bailiff announced. "The Superior Court of Franklin County is now in session, the Honorable Judge Margaret Sullivan presiding." After everyone was seated, Judge Sullivan looked down at her papers, then at the prosecution table where Assistant District Attorney Raymond Pierce sat with his files neatly organized before him. Then her gaze moved to the defense table. Jessica Thornton sat beside her attorney, Craig Delmont. But instead of the contrite, humble demeanor one might expect from someone accused of assaulting an elderly veteran, Jessica looked bored. She examined her manicured nails. She sighed audibly. She whispered something to her attorney that made her suppress a smile. Judge Sullivan's eyes narrowed slightly, but she said nothing. "Not yet. Mr. Pierce, you may present the people's opening statement." The prosecutor stood, buttoned his jacket, and approached the jury box. He was methodical, presenting the facts without theatrics. The video evidence, the witness testimony, Harold Chen's injuries, the medical reports. He painted a clear picture of an unprovoked assault by someone who believed she was untouchable. When he finished, Judge Sullivan turned to the defense. "Mr. Delmont?" The defense attorney stood, smooth and polished in his expensive suit. His opening was predictable: an unfortunate accident, a momentary lapse in judgment, a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. He suggested that Harold Chen had accidentally stumbled, that Jessica had barely touched him, that this was a case of an elderly man's fragility rather than a young woman's violence. It was a performance, and not a particularly convincing one. Then came the witnesses. Mrs. Rodriguez, the store owner, testified first. She was clear and unwavering. "I saw her shove him with both hands. It was deliberate. He went flying backward." The video footage was played. Even in silence, it was damning. Jessica's body language, the aggressive shove, Harold's helpless fall, it all told the story. When it was the defense's turn to cross-examine, Craig Delmont tried to poke holes in the testimony, but Mrs. Rodriguez held firm. Then Harold Chen was called to the witness stand. A hush fell over the courtroom as the elderly man slowly made his way forward, still using his cane. His daughter Sarah helped him into the witness box. He was sworn in, his voice quiet but steady. Mr. Chen, the prosecutor began gently, can you tell us in your own words what happened on the afternoon of June 14th? Harold took a breath. I was just trying to go into the store to pick up my prescription. I have arthritis, so I move slowly. This young lady was coming out, not looking where she was going. We almost bumped into each other. I apologized, even though I don't think I did anything wrong. I always try to be polite. His voice wavered slightly. She was angry. She called me an old man, like it was something shameful. I tried to move, but my leg, it doesn't work like it used to. And then she just pushed me. Hard. I remember hitting the wall, and then I was on the ground, and there was blood, and I was so confused. He paused, clearly reliving the trauma. I served this country. I raised my family here. I never hurt anyone. I just don't understand why she hated me so much just for being old and slow. Several people in the gallery wiped their eyes. Even the court reporter looked moved. Judge Sullivan's expression remained professional, but something flickered in her eyes, recognition of injustice, of cruelty against someone vulnerable. When it was the defense's turn, Craig Delmont approached with theatrical sympathy. Mr. Chen, I'm sorry this happened to you. But isn't it possible you simply lost your balance? That my client barely touched you and your own instability caused the fall. Harold looked at him steadily. Young man, I may be old, but I know the difference between falling and being pushed. She pushed me. She meant to hurt me. The defense tried a few more approaches, but Harold wouldn't budge. His testimony was devastating in its simple honesty. After a brief recess, it was time for Jessica Thornton to take the stand. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. Jessica walked to the witness box with her head high, her expression one of barely concealed contempt for the entire proceeding. She was sworn in, took her seat, and immediately crossed her arms, body language that screamed defensiveness and defiance. Her attorney led her through a carefully scripted version of events. She claimed Harold had stumbled into her path, that she had only steadied herself, that she may have accidentally made contact, but certainly didn't push him. Her tone was dismissive. She never once looked at Harold Chen. She referred to him as that man, rather than by name. And how did you feel when you were arrested? Delmont asked, setting up her sympathy play. Jessica's eyes flashed. I was humiliated. Treated like a criminal when I hadn't done anything wrong. The officers were rude and didn't care who I was married to. It was completely. Objection, the prosecutor interrupted. Relevance of the defendant's marital connections? Sustained, Judge Sullivan said sharply, leaning forward slightly. Ms. Thornton, please confine your answers to what is relevant to the case. Jessica shot the judge a look that bordered on insolent. Fine. I just think this whole thing is ridiculous. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Judge Sullivan's jaw tightened. When the prosecutor stood for cross-examination, Jessica's mask began to crack. Ms. Thornton, you testified that you may have accidentally made contact with Mr. Chen. Is that your testimony? Yes. Then can you explain why 3 witnesses testified they saw you deliberately push him? They were mistaken. All 3 of them? Including the store owner who was standing 5 feet away? Jessica's voice rose. People see what they want to see. Everyone's against me because of who I'm married to. This is all political. Ms. Thornton, do you feel any remorse for what happened to Harold Chen? She hesitated, clearly weighing her response. I'm sorry he fell. But I didn't do anything wrong. He spent 5 days in the hospital. 2 broken ribs. A concussion. A fractured wrist. And you don't feel responsible? Jessica's composure finally shattered. Look, I'm tired of this. He was in my way. Maybe if he can't move fast enough to avoid people, he shouldn't be out in public. I have a life. I have things to do. I can't be expected to navigate around every slow old person who—" The courtroom erupted. Judge Sullivan's gavel came down like thunder. "Order! Order in this court!" The noise died down, but the damage was done. Jessica had revealed exactly who she was. Judge Sullivan looked at the defendant with barely concealed disgust. "Miss Thornton, you will control yourself in my courtroom, or I will hold you in contempt. Do you understand?" Jessica, realizing she had just destroyed her own defense, nodded mutely. The rest of the trial proceeded swiftly. The prosecution rested. The defense offered a weak closing argument about reasonable doubt. The jury deliberated for less than 90 minutes. Guilty. On all counts. When the verdict was read, Jessica's face went white. For the first time, the reality of consequences seemed to dawn on her. Judge Sullivan scheduled sentencing for the following morning to allow the court to prepare a pre-sentencing report. As the courtroom emptied, people whispered about what would happen next. Would she get probation? Community service? A slap on the wrist? Harold Chen, exhausted but relieved, was helped out by his daughter. He had told his truth. Now it was up to the judge. That evening, Judge Sullivan reviewed the case files in her chambers. She had already decided on the appropriate sentence based on precedent, the severity of the injuries, and the defendant's complete lack of remorse. The next morning, the courtroom filled once again. Jessica Thornton sat at the defense table, now wearing fear on her face instead of arrogance. Her attorney whispered assurances that she would likely receive probation. Judge Sullivan entered and took her seat. "Ms. Thornton, please rise." Jessica stood, trembling slightly. Judge Sullivan looked down at her notes, then directly at the defendant. "Ms. Thornton, this court has reviewed your case extensively. Your actions were deliberate, cruel, and showed a shocking disregard for human dignity. Your victim was a vulnerable elderly man who served his country and his community with honor. Your behavior in this courtroom has demonstrated that you feel entitled to treat others with contempt simply because you believe your connections place you above accountability." Jessica's attorney started to speak, but Judge Sullivan held up her hand. "I am prepared to render sentence, but first I want to know if anyone wishes to speak on behalf of the defendant or the victim. Is there anyone present who wishes to address the court?" A long silence filled the room, and then someone stood up in the back of the courtroom. All heads turned toward the back of the courtroom. A man in his early 50s rose slowly from the last row, where he had been sitting partially obscured by other spectators. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with graying hair cut short and a weathered face that spoke of years of difficult work. He wore a dark suit, but his bearing was unmistakably that of a law enforcement officer. Detective Marcus Thornton, Jessica's husband. A ripple of recognition swept through the gallery. Reporters sat up straighter, pens poised. The prosecutor exchanged a glance with his assistant. Even Judge Sullivan's eyebrows raised slightly. No one had known he was there. Jessica turned in her seat, her face a mixture of relief and hope. Finally, someone to save her. Her husband would use his influence, his connections, his reputation to make this all go away. She had been texting him constantly, begging him to fix this, to talk to people, to make them understand. "And you are?" Judge Sullivan asked, though she clearly knew. "Detective Marcus Thornton, Your Honor. Franklin Police Department, 16 years of service. I'm the defendant's husband." His voice was deep, controlled, but heavy with emotion. "Does the defense wish this witness to testify?" Craig Delmont stood quickly. "Your Honor, Detective Thornton was not listed as a witness, but given that he is the defendant's spouse and may offer relevant character testimony, we would request the court's discretion to allow him to speak." Judge Sullivan considered this. "Very well. Detective Thornton, Please approach the witness stand. Marcus walked down the center aisle, his footsteps echoing in the silent courtroom. As he passed the row where Harold Chen sat with his daughter, he paused briefly and looked at the elderly man. Their eyes met. Marcus's expression was pained, apologetic. Harold simply nodded, his face gentle and sad. Marcus was sworn in and took his seat in the witness box. Jessica was smiling now, confident. Her husband was here. He would fix everything. Craig Delmont approached with an eager expression. Detective Thornton, thank you for being here. Can you tell the court about your wife's character? Marcus was silent for a long moment, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured and calm, but laced with barely contained emotion. I've been a police officer for 16 years, Your Honor. I've worked narcotics, homicide, gang suppression. I've seen the worst of humanity. I've arrested murderers, rapists, child abusers. I've been shot at twice. I've held dying victims in my arms. I've knocked on doors at midnight to tell parents their children aren't coming home. He paused, collecting himself. I became a cop because I believe in justice. I believe in protecting people who can't protect themselves. I believe that the law applies to everyone equally, or it means nothing. Jessica's smile was beginning to fade. This wasn't going the way she expected. I've been married to Jessica for 4 years. I've watched her become someone I no longer recognize. Someone entitled. Someone who believes that being married to me gives her special privileges. Someone who treats service workers with contempt, who parks in handicapped spaces because she doesn't want to walk, who has called the station to try to get friends and family members out of traffic tickets. Craig Delmont's face went pale. Detective Thornton, perhaps we should. But Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger. I've made excuses for her. I've told myself it was just immaturity, that she'd grow out of it. I've covered for her. I've used my position to make her problems disappear. I've been a coward and a hypocrite, and I'm ashamed of that. He turned to look directly at his wife. Jessica's face was frozen in shock and horror. When I heard what you did to Mr. Chen, I was disgusted. But I wasn't surprised. I had watched you treat elderly people with disrespect before. I had seen you shove past people, insult waiters, berate cashiers. I had witnessed your cruelty and done nothing to stop it. Tears began streaming down Marcus's face, but he didn't wipe them away. I sat in this courtroom yesterday and listened to your testimony. I heard you say that elderly people who move slowly shouldn't be in public. I heard you show zero remorse for putting a 73-year-old veteran in the hospital. And I realized something. He stood up in the witness box, his imposing frame suddenly seeming to fill the entire courtroom. I realized that by protecting you from consequences, by using my badge to shield you from accountability, I created this. I enabled you to become someone who thinks she's above the law. I failed you as a husband. I failed Mr. Chen as a police officer. And I failed this community that I swore to serve. Judge Sullivan leaned forward, completely focused on this unexpected testimony. Marcus turned to face the judge directly. Your Honor, I am not here to defend my wife. I am here to support justice. What she did was cruel, cowardly, and criminal. She assaulted a defenseless elderly man because she was inconvenienced for 30 seconds. She has shown no genuine remorse. And she believes, because I taught her to believe, that she's untouchable. His voice broke. But she's not. No one is. No one should be. Jessica started to stand, to say something, but her attorney pulled her back down. Marcus continued, Your Honor, I'm here to tell you that my wife deserves whatever sentence the law prescribes for this crime. She deserves to face the consequences of her actions without any special consideration because of who she's married to. I will not use my position to influence this case. I will not make phone calls on her behalf. I will not ask for favors or leniency." He paused, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "In fact, I'm asking you to sentence her to the maximum penalty allowed by law. Because that's what justice demands. That's what Mr. Chen deserves. And that's what my wife needs if she's ever going to become a decent human being." The courtroom was completely silent. Several people were openly crying. Reporters frantically scribbled notes. Jessica's face had gone from shock to rage to something like devastation. She was staring at her husband as if she had never seen him before. Marcus turned to look at Harold Chen. "Mr. Chen, I am so deeply sorry for what my wife did to you. I'm sorry for the pain she caused you. I'm sorry that someone who shares my name hurt you. You served your country with honor. You deserve to live in peace and dignity. What happened to you was wrong, and on behalf of my family, I apologize." Harold Chen, tears running down his weathered cheeks, nodded. "I forgive you, son. You're not responsible for what she did." Marcus's composure finally cracked completely. He put his face in his hands and sobbed, deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place of profound grief and shame. Judge Sullivan allowed him a moment, then spoke gently. "Detective Thornton, does counsel have any questions for you?" Craig Delmont looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. "No, Your Honor. No questions." "Does the prosecution wish to cross-examine?" The prosecutor stood. "No, Your Honor. The witness's testimony speaks for itself." "Very well. Detective Thornton, you may step down. And for what it's worth, the court recognizes your courage in speaking the truth today. That couldn't have been easy." Marcus nodded, unable to speak. He stepped down from the witness box, but instead of returning to his seat, he walked directly up to Harold Chen. He extended his hand. "Sir, I know it doesn't fix anything, but I am truly sorry." Harold took his hand in both of his own. "You're a good man, detective. A good man who made some mistakes. That makes you human, not a villain. I see your heart. It's in the right place." Marcus squeezed the old man's hands, nodded, and then walked out of the courtroom, unable to bear staying for what came next. Jessica watched him go, her face a mask of disbelief and betrayal. Her whole world had just collapsed. The person she had counted on to protect her from consequences had instead demanded that she face them. Judge Sullivan cleared her throat. "Is there anyone else who wishes to speak before sentencing?" Harold Chen raised his hand slightly. "May I say something, Your Honor?" "Of course, Mr. Chen." The elderly man stood, steadying himself with his cane, and addressed the court. "I've been thinking a lot about this since it happened. About anger and justice and what it means to be a good person. I'm not going to lie, what she did hurt me. Not just physically, but in here." He tapped his chest. "It made me feel small. Worthless. Like my life didn't matter because I'm old and slow." He looked at Jessica, who couldn't meet his eyes. "But I've also been thinking about Detective Thornton. About what it must have cost him to stand up here and speak the truth. About how much he must love his wife to want her to become better, even if it means she has to suffer first. That's real love. Tough love. The kind that doesn't protect you from consequences but walks with you through them." He took a breath. "Your Honor, I believe in justice. I believe she needs to be held accountable. But I also believe in redemption. I believe people can change if they choose to. So whatever you decide, I just want to say that I don't hate her. I pity her. Because she's been living in a world where she thought she was better than everyone else, and that's a lonely, empty way to live." He sat back down slowly, exhausted. Judge Sullivan nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Chen. Your grace is remarkable." She turned back to Jessica, who was now crying. Not the manipulative tears of someone trying to garner sympathy, but the genuine tears of someone whose entire worldview had been shattered. "Ms. Thornton, please stand." Jessica stood on shaking legs. Judge Sullivan's voice was firm but not cruel. "You have been found guilty of felony assault causing bodily harm to a vulnerable person. Your actions were deliberate and cruel. Your behavior in this court showed contempt for the legal process and for your victim. You have demonstrated no genuine remorse until this very moment, and even now, I suspect your tears are more for yourself than for the pain you caused." She paused, letting the words sink in. "However, I have also witnessed something extraordinary today. I have seen a man sacrifice his own marriage and reputation to demand justice. I have seen a victim extend grace and forgiveness. And I have seen the possibility, just the possibility, that you might finally understand the gravity of what you've done." Judge Sullivan looked down at her notes, then back at Jessica. "Therefore, it is the judgment of this court." Judge Sullivan's voice rang clear and authoritative through the packed courtroom. "It is the judgment of this court that you, Jessica Marie Thornton, are hereby sentenced to 2 years in County Correctional Facility, with the possibility of early release after serving a minimum of 18 months, contingent upon demonstrated rehabilitation and good behavior." Gasps erupted through the gallery. Jessica's knees buckled slightly, and her attorney had to steady her. But Judge Sullivan wasn't finished. "In addition to incarceration, upon your release, you will serve 500 hours of community service, specifically working with senior citizens at nursing homes, community centers, and veteran support facilities. You will attend weekly counseling sessions addressing entitlement, empathy development, and anger management. You will be on probation for 3 additional years following your release." The judge leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "Furthermore, you will pay full restitution to Mr. Harold Chen for all medical expenses, lost wages from his volunteer work, and pain and suffering, in the amount of $75,000. You will also make a public apology, to be published in the local newspaper and read aloud at a community gathering, acknowledging your actions and their impact." Jessica was openly weeping now, her face in her hands. "Ms. Thornton, I am giving you something precious that you did not give Mr. Chen, a chance. A chance to prove that you are capable of growth, of empathy, of becoming a contributing member of society rather than someone who believes they're entitled to harm others without consequence. Whether you seize this opportunity or squander it is entirely up to you." Judge Sullivan's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Your husband gave you a gift today, though you may not recognize it as such. He loved you enough to stop enabling your worst impulses. He gave you the truth, even though it cost him dearly. I suggest you reflect deeply on that during your incarceration." She brought the gavel down with finality. "This court is adjourned." As the bailiff prepared to escort Jessica out, a voice called from the courtroom doors. "Your Honor, may I address the court briefly?" It was Marcus Thornton. He had returned, his eyes red-rimmed but his bearing dignified. Judge Sullivan nodded. "Proceed, detective." Marcus walked to the front of the courtroom, but he didn't approach Jessica. Instead, he addressed Judge Sullivan directly. "Your Honor, I want to add to the consequences my wife will face. I am filing for legal separation, effective immediately. I will not be waiting for her release. Our marriage, as it currently exists, is over." Jessica let out a strangled sob. "However," Marcus continued, his voice steady, "I am establishing a trust fund that will pay for her counseling, education, and rehabilitation services while she's incarcerated and after her release, if she chooses to use them. The money will be available only for constructive purposes: therapy, education, job training, and eventually, helping her rebuild her life in a meaningful way." He finally turned to look at his wife. "Jessica, I did love you. Maybe I still do, in some way. But I can't be married to the person you've become. The only way forward is for both of us to face the truth and become better people. Maybe someday, when you've genuinely changed, We can have a conversation about what comes next. But that day is years away, and it may never come. That's up to you." He turned back to the judge. "Thank you, Your Honor, for having the courage to hold everyone accountable, regardless of their connections." With that, Marcus Thornton walked out of the courtroom for the second time, his head high despite the tears streaming down his face. The bailiff gently took Jessica's arm. As she was led away, she looked back one final time at the courtroom, at Harold Chen, who watched her with sad but compassionate eyes, at the judge, whose stern expression carried a hint of hope, at the empty space where her husband had stood. For the first time in her privileged life, Jessica Thornton understood what consequences felt like.